The next section will be equally interesting. Many of the audience, probably from the news, you already know that there was a G20 meeting in Rome, and one of the big topics is the 2021 COP26. Basically, it's a United Nations Climate Change Conference. And our President Xi, in his address, he already mentioned China is fully committed to let our country's emissions to peak before 2030, and we will achieve net zero in 2060. Now, this is actually a very tall order to get there. So today I'm going to talk to an expert in this area, and his name is Mr. Philip Lilliford. Mr. Lilliford is now in UK, and he's going to talk about how to do ESG with technology. And let me switch on, Philip.
Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Philip. This is actually your morning, right?
It is indeed.
Thank you for joining us in such an early morning. Now, this session's topic, it's Wasanda ecosphere. And Philip, you are going to talk about how this so-called ecosphere platform can help businesses and enterprises in dealing with various ESG issues. So I will let you start and share with us how you can help the enterprises, and we will get into conversation to learn more. Thank you, Philip. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you for having me. I think what is really important is to give you a little bit of background as to where we started. We were founded in 2017, so we're a young startup, but it is actually my second startup. I exited my previous one in 2016. And after many years in investment banking, I found myself in logistics and supply chain, which is, when I started, was sort of very slow in adopting technology, I have to say. So in 2017, I was looking at how we could automate the process of supply chain in terms of allocation of capacity, finding space on a ship, or even tracking your assets across various locations. And we achieved a lot in a very short period of time, but unfortunately for us, we innovated faster than the adoption was taking up. So what we really wanted to do was step back and look at a unique selling point for our company, because after all, we have to generate revenue and continue to survive. My passion has always been how logistics and the supply chain world affects the environment. So this is nothing, it wasn't new, or it wasn't sort of like a spark moment of genius. I took a step back and realized that the world has started talking about sustainability, climate change, issues in the supply chain. And we have seen this, and we are still seeing this squeeze in the supply chain today. Because of COVID, there's an economic impact. And of course, we don't want to be negative. Of course, we will solve these problems. But what's really important is, in terms of sustainability, creating the transparency from end to end of the goods and commodities we consume, and understanding whether they are sustainable in production, farming, their transportation, and they're even down to the last mile. So because of our expertise in actually being able to automate the supply chain operation, we took a holistic approach to ESG, and we incorporated a number of technologies, including satellite and infrared remote sensing, to look at the source, and then of course, IoT, machine learning, to automate and track the assets across its supply chain. And we do this by also incorporating a large data sets and big data to understand the social aspect of the supply chain. And we were able to come up with a pragmatic and practical way of looking at ESG, which allowed us to steer away from the esoteric financial model of ESG, which looks at numbers from balance sheets and income statements. So we think looking at the physical world of the supply chain, it made a huge more sense for us, and it gave us the ability to actually make an immediate impact, where now we can screen for every single transaction. And over time, you will build enough data that creates an ecosystem for any organization to understand its ESG benchmarks on all three pillars: environmental, social, and governance, much less so because governance has been around since a very long time. So that is what we do. That is the background. It's certainly not as exciting as a flying car, I have to admit.
Now, this may not sound as exciting as a flying car, but this is certainly a very important issue. Actually, I will share with you, in Hong Kong, the listed company, now they are required to have a special session in their annual report to talk about ESG. But exactly like what you say is that ESG is still new to many enterprises, and they hire outside help to try to put a ESG report to talk about whether they are ready, their readiness about ESG, etc., etc. What impressed me is that you are taking a holistic approach, and you are really, your approach is making sense because you're talking about a very pragmatic, holistic approach, which really based on facts and based on various data you get, instead of like a standard accounting report. Now, having said that, I need to pull a little bit back to reality. Will that be generally accepted by the business world? And how would it become acceptable to various standards in various fields? How do you go about doing that?
I think it's a very good question. And I think what we generally talk about here is what we term as the transition risk, right? So the transition risk is really a very simple concept. And this concept is we have a lot of regulations that are not mandated per se today, but they are almost kind of voluntary. You know, if you can follow this list or this reporting standard, then fantastic, you can prove you're sustainable. However, how long is it going to be before there is a mandate? And do we actually know when the deadlines are going to be? And should we be preparing now? I mean, it is not a bad thing because, yes, we entered the market from the financial services kind of angle. But today, the way we look at it, we are working with corporations, manufacturers, and various different verticals because, you see, consumers are actually demanding, and we are seeing this in the news, the COP26. They talked about deforestation reduction around the world, which was, of course, included Brazil in the conversation. We talked about that methane reduction and carbon net zero. And there's a lot of ambitious, as you called it, tall orders, right? So it is not just China or Hong Kong who will be facing these sorts of issues. And we also have to take a step back and look at our society. We are a consumer society. We are a lot more sort of, the wealthier generation coming out from the last 100 years. We have the ability to consume products from various parts of the world, but we have reached a juxtaposition where the consumer is asking the question now, and they are getting younger, and they are asking, are we treating our planet with respect? So in terms of a product, if you are selling a product or manufacturing a product, you want to cater to your consumers' ethical values and philosophies, correct? But also you want to be a responsible producer. You want to be a responsible supplier. So, there's many ways to do that. Of course, you want to screen your entire supply chain and provide some certification around it. But at the same time, there will come a time when this becomes regulation, and also when it becomes a financial decision for a lot of manufacturers and suppliers, because the institutions, financial institutions, and if you read the news, COP26 today will put financial services under a lot of stress. Today is the day there's going to be a lot of disclosure conversations. So the financial institutions are going to look at large manufacturers and corporates and say, well, we can give you these financial facilities and you can get better rates if you can prove that you are producing in a sustainable, socially equitable way.
So I'm going to have two following questions. Okay. The first one will be an exciting one. Just for the conversation, I brought this. Do you know what this is? This is a bottle of soy sauce. Okay. Now, treat me as an ethical, very environmentally sensitive 10 years old consumer. Can you use this soy sauce, the material is soy, to tell me about why it is important to understand the ESG implication of the material?
I think this is a fantastic analogy, actually. Thank you very much, Simon. Soya sauce. The main ingredient there is soya. And for those who don't know, one of the largest producers of soya is Brazil. And of course, I just mentioned the conversation at COP26 yesterday that promised reduction in deforestation and reforestation as a countermeasure. So what we can deduce from that is that the soya production has been associated in recent years with huge swaths of deforestation and land, right? And its production can be carbon intensive as well. So not to say that actually the soya bean is an evil, in itself, but it is the production that we have to be aware of. Is it sourced in a sustainable way? What was the last deforestation method? What fires are available on the farm? Where is the farm? Who is working on the farm? These are very important questions that not just people in ESG, but everybody as consumers, as human beings, we should be asking ourselves. So the soya bean, has a journey. It goes from one country to the next. First, it is farmed. Is the farming practices, sustainable? Is it done in a sort of scientifically less arduous way than, say, GMO or a different type of crop? But secondly, is the journey of that soya bean is very important too. Because if you have to understand that there is cultivation and there's machinery involved. So there is carbon emissions, and there's also carbon emissions from the carbon stocks that are in the land, in the soil. So you're emitting these, and then you have the inland transportation, then of course the sea transportation, which accounts for 70% of global trade.
Yes, and that's logistics, right?
That is logistics indeed. And what we do is we carbon measure, we screen the entire supply chain from inland, the cultivation, the process, any manufacturing process, in fact, and the vessel. So we have the carbon profile of your entire transaction, because, there will come a time when we are seriously going to start talking about carbon tax. I know it's been mentioned, and it is something that a lot of people are alluding to, but it will become a reality. I'm pretty sure of it, especially as we are under a lot of pressure to perform now.
This is very illustrating. And actually, from one end, from very fantastic technology and services, we actually going to a very much more serious topic, is survival of human race because of sustainability. Now, you share with us, your knowledge. Would you also share with us your business secret? That how do you convince normally a customer to get on this service so that they can get help? And normally you find it easier now as compared to before, because you just mentioned that ahead of time sometimes. We Chinese say to get a successful business, you need to have the right timing, the optimal location, teamwork, that is the ecology. And I would say, I would add one more point, is technology. Now, are you getting all four of them now? Is it much easier to promote your business now and help your customers now?
I think we are very lucky to be living in a time when the innovation and advancement of technology is really at an unprecedented pace. We had satellite technology for a long time, but now we can consume a huge amount of data and allow the machines to make, determine certain things for us. But as well as that, if we go back to the process that we were just discussing, we could, retrieve a soya bean, but that soya bean, there are bodies that certify that this soya bean has been part of a socially equitable, supply chain or value chain, meaning the people who are working in the process are being treated fairly, paid fairly, no children involved in that. And this information, believe it or not, is available publicly. But there is huge amounts of data to consume, and the average business owner doesn't really have the time to go and sift through all these audits and find certifications and actually make an informed decision. And this is why we have started this, because we want to actually help businesses with their effort to be sustainable. There is a lot of appetite, and there has been, interestingly, because a lot of people do ask me the question, are you finding it easier now because everybody's talking about it on the news? Funny enough, it has been a topic of conversation, but the technology wasn't there. People weren't able to collate large sets of data and make sense of it and produce a very simple dashboard to say, okay, not necessarily sustainable or not sustainable. We will tell you if it's not sustainable, but we will tell you what can be improved, which then creates a conversation between the supplier, the producer, the grower, the miner. You talked about electric vehicles earlier. That is a hot topic for us because mining electric vehicles don't actually come off the press being a sustainable product. They have to be, the batteries need certain commodities in them that are mined, and the mining process is still coal-fired, and these conditions are difficult. So we have to look at the bigger picture.
I see. Now, let me switch track a little bit because my background is in technology. You mentioned about satellite remote sensing. You mentioned about IoT, so that the data will get back for your big data analytics, and you use AI, actually, machine learning, to do analytics. Not all the audience are very detailed in this technology aspects. Can you spend a few minutes explaining how you do it and what do they do so that you can provide a service for your customers?
Absolutely. I think I very rarely actually throw these large buzzwords around, because I like to, again, go back to the practicality of what we do. I think what machine learning and artificial intelligence allow us to do is to program very, not very complex, but there are simple decision-making processes where we say, okay, if this commodity has a certification, who is the certifier and what other bodies does the supplier belong to? That will give us confidence that they are operating in a sustainable, certifiable way. And that is actually not a very complex decision for a machine to do once you have trained the model to do that. And this is just one layer, of course, but it is a very important layer, because you look at ESG, and the S actually is a very important one because it spills over both ways. Environmental, if you have deforestation, that will affect people in their livelihood. So you will find people moving away from villages, or they can't live in that area anymore because the land doesn't produce. Or in the G, then is the company governance actually, is it ethical, because the S is affected, that there is issues in the labor force, etc., etc. So a lot of the emphasis of the AI and the machine learning is on the S, because the social aspect of ESG is very important and very underrepresented, unfortunately, with other ESG providers. And it's very important for a lot of manufacturers and producers and suppliers, because you only need to have a conversation with them. They understand, a lot of these people are successful business people because they understand the people who are consuming their products. So it is not a matter of ESG is a new thing. I think the term ESG takes away from the human relationship with, I want to do things in the right way, and I want to do things or I want to turn a blind eye. So machine learning allows us to ask the questions that any business owner would want to ask. And they are simple questions, but the answer, to derive the answer, you have to go through a process of sifting through a large amount of data, understanding what that data means, whether it's structured, unstructured, and then derive from that an answer and produce it.
But to be honest, in the old days, I was from industry, we seldom worry about carbon dioxide, to be really honest. The ocean depletion is this whole thing is less than 30, 40 years old, as I can remember. So of course, I'm sure the manufacturers wants to do the right thing, but this is also a new understanding of our ecology, of our environment. Now, I think a lot of audience, me included, actually are quite interested in understanding then your business model. Is it a service, or is it a product? Is it a subscription? And when you find out for the customers, there needs to be change in order to get better. So are you also helping them to achieve that? Can you explain a little bit on what you do?
Yeah, generally speaking, we work with large corporations, investment banks, asset managers, and the financial services. So for that, we have some very clear workflows, especially in the commodity trading and the physical aspect. Our parent company is a maritime intelligence and data company. So it's the combination that gives us a very broad sort of reach. But going back to your question, the way we work with organizations, we have, again, adopting the same holistic and pragmatic way, because we understand the big picture. So what I provide to a financial services institution might not be the same thing I provide to an electronics manufacturer in Hong Kong or in Japan, for instance, because the ask and the requirement are very different. So you might have a manufacturer who wants to prove to his financial or the bank that to get a loan or a transaction of some kind, they can reduce the fees on that by proving that they are sustainable. Or they can actually attract more consumers, more people to their product because they can prove they are sustainable and they are sourcing ethically and so on and so forth. So these are two different approaches. And of course, there is an element of consultancy because, you know, AI and machine learning was developed by a human being. So the human beings have to first have a conversation before any of that can take place. It's understanding the nuances of each individual business and how it needs to be done. But then following on from that conversation, everything gets automated, you get a dashboard, and it really should be there as an informative way of doing business.
So it's a very special kind of tools to help an enterprise on the ESG front. And of course, in order to do that, you need to have a holistic approach. And then once you understand the operation, then you start to help them in that aspects, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. We have half a minute. I just want to say it's very impressive. This is new, but yet very important. And I'm very interested and also surprised that you say EV may not be very sustainable. So we need your help, you know, to educate us. And maybe the next topic after EV is flying car. Okay. Once again, thank you very much, Philip. It was very nice talking to you.
Pleasure.
And we learned a lot. Very appreciate that. You have a good day.